guys, and welcome back to another video on my channel. The reason that I didn't say a Mystery Monday at the beginning of this video is because I decided for the month of October, instead of doing Mystery Monday and Freaky Fridays, all of my videos are just going to be Halloween themed. So they're going to be things that kind of creep you out and leave you feeling a little bit unsettled. Also quickly, I do just want to address the fact that I'm not really sure how my videos for October are going to go because I am getting my wisdom teeth out in 2 weeks, so I just don't know how I'm going to maximize my filming and get as many videos as I can up for you guys, but I'm just not sure how it's going to play out. So with that all being said, let's get right into today's video. When Bob Kramer was a young boy, he used to drive down Brownsville Road located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and stop in front of the house 3406. This was his dream home. He loved this house since he was a child, and he used to sit outside of it and look at it and imagine living there as a kid or even as an adult and wondering what the inside of this house looked like because he just loved this home so much. In Bob's adult life, he went on to meet a woman by the name of Lissa, and in the 1980s they were married and they went on to have 4 children. Now oddly enough, in 1986, when the couple was looking for a home to move their family into, Bob's dream house at 3406 Brownsville Road actually went up for sale. Now they were looking to move back into the Pittsburgh area, and Bob, like I said, loved this house since he was a child, so when he saw that it was on the market, he needed to take his family to look at it because he really felt like this was some sort of miracle and he needed to move into that house. Strange things would start happening in this house before the family had even moved in. While looking at the home, the family was doing a quick walkthrough when their 3-year-old son wandered off. Now something to keep in mind here is at this time all of their children were under the age of 5, so they were all quite young. Now, Lessa started looking for the 3-year-old and couldn't find him anywhere, and when she did finally find him, he was standing on the front porch of the home in a state of complete shock. He was crying so much that he couldn't catch his breath, and he just seemed very frightened. But the parents just chalked this up to him being separated from the family in a strange place that he was unfamiliar with. After doing the walkthrough of this home, Lissa would later say that she did not like this house at all. It really creeped her out, and for the amount of children that they had, this house was very large, and it had a lot of space that they didn't need. So she just thought it was a little bit creepy and too big, but she knew how much this house meant to her husband Bob, so she just kept her mouth shut and let him buy the home. Now when Bob was showing interest in the home, he decided to really lowball it, like you usually do when you're buying a house, hoping that the sellers will agree on a more reasonable price than what it is on the market for. But strangely enough, when Bob had lowballed so low, like insanely low, on this house, the sellers actually agreed to his price almost immediately. Bob has since said, after talking to the sellers and them agreeing on such a low price for the house, he does think that it seemed as if the sellers were very anxious and just really wanted to get away and separate themselves from the house. But at the time when he was going through the process of purchasing the home, he didn't think anything of it. Again, this was his dream home since he was a small child, so he was just absolutely over the moon, especially because of how low of a price he had gotten the home for. Now, on one incident, Bob had actually been talking to the sellers and was just asking if the structure of the home was good, if all of the appliances worked correctly, just making sure that the house that he bought didn't need any upgrades or anything like that. And somehow the sellers started to talk about how a Catholic Mass was actually held on the grounds of the home. Now, Bob said he doesn't know how this came into the conversation, he doesn't know why they slipped this into the conversation, and it did just leave him a little bit unsettled, and he kept thinking about it for the days following talking to the seller. At this point, Bob was already set in buying this home. He loved this house. He really loved this house. It had a deep rooting within him because it reminded him of his childhood, and it seemed like all of his dreams were going to just fall into place. So the family did end up moving into the home, and just a few weeks after living there, they started to notice some strange things happening. Nothing too outrageous, but they did start to notice that the radio would come on by itself, or the radio stations would change by itself when no one was near the radio at all. The water in the sink would just turn on and off by itself. They'd often walk into the kitchen to find the tap running. Just things like that that didn't seem too outrageous, but just weren't really explainable because, again, all of their children were quite young. They couldn't reach the radios, they couldn't reach the sink, so it just didn't make much sense to the couple. One thing that did keep happening that seemed to irritate Bob quite a bit was in one of the closets where I guess he kept his coats and things like that, like his outdoor wear stuff by the front door. The light in the closet had like a pull string, and every time Bob would open this closet and go to turn on the light, the string would be raveled around the light bulb so that you couldn't pull the string to turn it on. Now this started to really irritate Bob, so he just said to his wife one day, like, "Do you keep pulling the string and letting it go so that it gets raveled around the light?" And his wife said no, she never really goes in that closet, and at this time she'd actually said that she hadn't been in there for a couple days. This was a place where Bob pretty much only kept his coat, so she had no reason to be going in and out of that closet. At this point, like I mentioned, Bob was pretty annoyed because he'd get up in the morning to go to work, he'd get dressed, and it would be very early in the morning, and he's rushing out the door, and he goes to turn on the light and the string isn't there. So he was starting to get very irritated by this. So he decided to do somewhat of an experiment. He actually turned the light off, unraveled the string so that it was hanging down, and then him and his wife and the children went out. And when they came home, he opened the closet door to put his coat back in to see how the light was left, and actually the string was still raveled around the light bulb. And like I mentioned before, nobody was in the home during the time that they had gone out. This was his kind of experiment to see if his wife was doing this, but she wasn't. After not being able to come up with any explanation as to why the string would have been wrapped around the light, and going hand in hand with all of the other strange things that had been happening in the home, Bob and Lissa sat down and had a conversation and came to the conclusion that they were living in a haunted house. But anything that the entities or the ghosts within the home were doing wasn't anything too extreme. Like I mentioned before, it was just like them turning on and off the radio or wrapping the string around the light, so they were completely unbothered. So they just went on living in this house that they assumed was haunted, and they actually got used to little strange unexplained things happening on a day-to-day basis, but nothing that was happening was scary or unsettling or violent or anything like that, so it didn't really bother the family too much. Now this next bit of information is a little bit strange, and it doesn't really have any explanation to go along with, but I do think that it is a quite interesting part of this story. So about a year after living in this home, Bob was doing some gardening in the backyard, and he came across a large metal box. Now it wasn't like huge, but he could hold it in his hands, like it wasn't like super tiny, and he didn't really open it, but he called the previous owners thinking that maybe it belonged to them and they had left it there by accident or something along those lines. But he said after calling the people who used to live there, they just seemed very annoyed and said to him, "You're going to want to put that back where you found it, or else very bad things are going to happen," is kind of how they seemed like they were explaining it to him, like this box was doing some good for the home. Now it is unclear if Bob ever opened that box or if he moved it, if he put it back, what was inside, and if it had anything to do with anything that was going on in the house is completely unclear. But the family went on to live in that home for almost a decade, and all of the activity within the house was pretty calm. They weren't bothered by anything, just like I mentioned before, it was just a super calm haunting. But in 2001, unfortunately, that would all change. It seemed like whatever was haunting this house grew to become very irritated or frustrated and started to become more violent with the family. The family reported seeing puffs of black and white smoke all over the house at very random times. They could constantly hear the sounds of it as if somebody was running around the home all the time, and the entity started to attack the family. They would often wake up with bite marks, scratches, and unexplained bruises, and Lissa and the children's mental health just really started to deteriorate at this time. Now, like I mentioned before, it was believed that this entity would appear as smoke all over the house, sometimes in a black puff of smoke, sometimes in a white puff of smoke, but Bob actually said that on some occasions you couldn't see the ghost, but you could smell it as it gave off a very strong and disturbing stench. Over time, the entity began to grow more and more violent, and the situation just became more and more extreme until one day, Bob's oldest son, who was not acting like himself for quite a while, all of a sudden just lost it and violently attacked his father, Bob. Now, the attack was so violent that the family actually had to call the police, and the boy was detained and taken down to the station. Now, as if that wasn't enough stress on the family for one night, when they woke up the next morning after dealing with all of that the night before, they had actually found Bob's elderly aunt, who had been staying with them, deceased in her room. It was found that Bob's elderly aunt had actually died from natural causes, but this still did not help out the family's situation, and Lissa and the two other children's mental health was so bad at this time that they actually were receiving medical attention for it. Now, the family didn't know what to do. They weren't religious at all, but at this time they reached out to the church and asked them if they knew anything that they could do to stop this from happening and if they could possibly help the family. After coming to the family home, the priest told Bob that he believed that his home was infested with demons. At this point, he actually contacted an exorcist from New York and brought him to the family home. But while that was all going through, the church actually came into the home and they prayed and they tried to bless the home, and they gave Bob and his wife and his children crucifixes and rosary beads just to hang around the house to kind of keep the negative energy out. But Bob said that this ghost or entity did not leave easily, and it was a day-to-day struggle with this being that they couldn't see. He would often, like I mentioned before, be woken up by bites and scratches covered in bruises, and the rosaries would be broken, the crucifixes would be smashed or just disappear altogether. Just all of this crazy stuff just started to happen so quickly, and it escalated just as fast. One day the family was out, and when they returned home they found an odd liquid seeping down the walls. They said that the liquid smelled very foul, and they actually sent it off to a lab to get tested. Now, the liquid was tested, and what exactly it is came back inconclusive, but it was found to have human cells within it. While waiting for the exorcist to come down from New York, the family actually hired some mediums and some psychics to come into the home and see if they could do anything and figure out why this was happening and how to stop it. And on one occasion, a man came into the home who I believe was a psychic, and he stopped near the closet and said that he felt a very strong amount of energy near the closet. So with that being said, Lessa and Bob, without any hesitation, broke into the wall in the closet. And what they found in there was absolutely mind-blowing. Once they opened up the wall, they found personal belongings of every single previous owner of the home. Every single one. Everybody who had ever lived there had some belongings stashed in this wall. Now that included the Kramers. Actually, the boys' Legos were found stashed within the wall without any explanation of how they got in there. And Lessa actually says that she remembers her son saying that he couldn't find his Legos, and they searched for them for a little bit and then just completely forgot about them and didn't think about it ever again, but they were inside the wall. On top of that, they also found photographs of the first original owners who lived in this home. Now, these photos of the original owners actually had writing and drawings all over it, and after the priest looked at this, he said that he believed that this writing and drawing on this photo were demonic, as if whoever had put these in the wall had cursed the original owner. An exorcist was performed within the home, but it didn't seem as if it had worked, and for the following years the family seemed to be in constant battle with whatever spirit was haunting their home. But a few years later, all of the paranormal activity within the home just seemed to stop. There wasn't any explanation as to why the haunting just abruptly ended, but it did, and all of the family's mental health and everything like that seemed to start to go back to normal. Now, Bob actually wrote a book about his experience, and it's called The Demons of Brownsville Road. And of course, in that book, he goes more into detail about this haunting and everything that happened within the home than I could in this video. But unfortunately, even though the horror within the home did seem to end, the family's bad luck just continued. The oldest son of Lessa and Bob actually passed away, and following that, Lissa's mental health started to deteriorate again, and she fell into a deep depression, which caused her and Bob to get a divorce. Now, they aren't living in that home anymore, but I do believe that today it is a bed and breakfast, so if you want to stay there, I'm pretty sure that you can do so. After living on this land and experiencing the haunting and all of the horrors that they did experiencing on this land, Bob decided to research the history of the place in which his home was built. And that is when he found out that allegedly in March of 1792, a woman and her 3 children were murdered on this land by some tribe. Now, the tribe wasn't known to kill people, but they did want to kind of make a message for people to not enter their land or trespass onto their property. It is said that because the tribe murdered 3 children along with their mother, an evil spirit haunted that grounds and made the land rotten, and many years later a house was actually built on this land. Now, the original owners of this home was a doctor, and he would perform illegal abortions. on that property because they weren't legal at that time. And knowing a little bit about illegal abortions, they often result in death for both the mother and the child. And it is said that the ghost who haunted this house pretty much targeted children and women, which would explain why Lissa and the children experienced much more of the terror within this home than Bob did himself. Now, like I mentioned, if you guys are interested in more information on this case, you can buy Bob's book. But with that all being said, that brings us to the end of this video. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to comment down below what you'd like to see in my future videos, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell so that you don't miss any future videos from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys!